Okay, well, once again, want to welcome you all back. Yesterday, we began with a land acknowledgement statement that the North Sound has adopted. Our office sits in Bellingham and is the traditional homelands of the Lummi and Nooksack people. Today, we are honored to have Michael Vendiola with us to join and welcoming us to this very special place. So Michael, I think we are going to switch it over to you.
All right, I appreciate this opportunity. I'll just, I'm going to share my screen here in a minute, but I'll say, Kolapo di ishits chos adeque di ichu, ha slachel. That's a welcome friends and relatives, each and every one of you. And Hastahel is good day to you. And that's in the Northern Lushootseed dialect, which is actually south of where I'm sitting from. I make my home in Lummi, and I'm an ancestral relative to the Lummi Nation in the Hilaire family. And I'm also Swinomish, which is Swidubsh, which is near the Connor, Washington. And I'm an enrolled citizen there. So I'm was invited here by, I see people are trying to enter the room, and should I add them? It looks like I'm the admin. I'll just add them. Welcome. And I'm very honored. My daughter works for Sound ACH, and she gave me, we spent a lot of time talking about the work that you all are doing. And she invited me to share a few words. And first of all, I just want to thank you for, the very important work you're doing in each of the communities. Not that I know all the fine details, but I get a sense of, just through my daughter, some of the things that you're doing. And I know I don't have very much time. I'm just taking up a little bit at the beginning. And I know some of the work is really rooted in relationships, relationship building, and I appreciate that there was a land acknowledgement at the beginning, which has been something that organizations have been picking up and embracing. And one of the important things to know about that is it's a deeper study than just doing the land acknowledgement, because I have seen other organizations do land acknowledgements, but not really understand the meaning behind it and kind of the political ramifications and kind of historical ramifications. And I encourage you to delve deeper into that. And part of my presentation today is focused on that. And I really, a bit about myself, I was born in Seattle, Washington. My mom grew up there. Her mom left the reservation as part of relocation. My grandmother from our traditional lands at Swinomish to the urban environment. My mom, she got older and had all of us 5 kids, made the decision that she wanted to move us back closer to our home, and be a part of our tribal community and understanding the importance of that connection that she knew only a little about, not growing up there, but in the summer times would come and spend the summers with her grandfather. So it's so cool to be the person to admit everyone in. I feel like I'm not only, I'm doing something useful. And so we moved on to March Point, and March Point's a really significant place for our community. It was actually the northern half of our reservation, under the Treaty of 1855. And in 1878, it was removed from our reservation by executive order by the president, which is illegal by definition of the Declaration of Independence. And I mean sorry, not the Declaration of Independence, oh shoot, I'm forgetting the other document, but under treaty making policies, treaties are the highest law of the land and cannot be changed other than by Congress. And so this just to give you a snapshot onto how we as native people, a lot of times folks kind of bunch us in with kind of the idea of people of color or ethnic people or ethnic groups, but there's a legal process to it as well that's very prevalent, and that tribes continue to defend and rely upon to this day. And so a lot of you who work with tribal communities work under that, should understand that that's a part of the relationship building. And I'll just say, I've made a career out of education. I've worked at every level of education, from childcare through higher education, specifically focusing on Native education. And I'm fortunate enough to now, in the last 2 years, be working at my home tribe, focusing on all of those areas from childcare through higher ed as one trajectory for a tribal member to go through childcare to higher, with the idea of going to at least higher ed or past high school in some sort. And but in my profession, I've had the experience to work with a lot of state agencies. I worked for a state agency. I worked for the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction as the Director of Native Education for 3 years. And I'm on the National Indian Education Association as a board member. And so I try to do my role in the role that's been identified by my community to uphold education. And in that work, I've come to know this phrase that I always share with everyone, or this question, which is to ask, what is the health of our relationship? So in a scenario where we're working with the state agency or the federal agency to support education, any agency we work with, we should be examining that question. What's the health of our relationship? How well do we know one another? How well do we work together? How well do we understand the agreements that we're operating under? And so, and that seems to be pretty consistent, not only in education, but in any agency, healthcare, mental health, hunting, fishing rights, gaming. It's pretty much across the board. We need to acknowledge how to work together. And it's really, that is a really big jump from what most of you probably got in if you went to public education, and what you learned about Native people. Probably what you learned about Native people was in the past, that they didn't really exist in contemporary society. There's been research that demonstrates that, of the 50 states, we only have half of them that even mention Native Americans in their public social studies curriculum. And of the 50%, only half of those talk about Native people. Half of them talk about Native people in a pre-1900 context. So in public education today, we don't really understand Native people, basically. Once you get into college, maybe you study more, or you get into agencies like yours, and you begin to work with these communities who have a really good working knowledge and understanding of their communities and the kind of things that they've gone through and worked with, and oftentimes have more knowledge than you do. You know, if you walk into meetings, and the person that you meet has been doing this for 20 years, whereas a state agency or a non-governmental agency, there's a high turnover rate, and that's always an issue that tribes bring forward is what happened to the last person? Where'd the last person go? We just explained and taught that person, now they're gone. And so that's some of the challenges that we face. And this is not even what I wanted to talk about, so I apologize. Hopefully that's useful. But I did want to share, if I could share my screen. Somebody said something. Yeah, it probably was the Constitution. I was referring to the Constitution. Under the Constitution, so treaties are the supreme law of the land. Here's a photo. This is a contextual photo, and I use it as a presentation. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Washington, ABD, and I did a talk there, basically talking about this subject of what is the health of our relationships. And usually the picture I'm trying to paint is just how vast United States American society is, from where they kind of understand Native people to the reality of and experiences of Native people. And so this is the photo. I got to share one photo in that presentation. That was their requirement, and I shared this one, which is a picture of my granddaughter, Aviana, and this is Michaela's daughter, and our future. Definitely what we're working towards to support all the resources and all the avenues and connections that we build. We hope that it, supports whatever she wants to do. And our family had a traditional naming almost 2 years ago now, and she received this name. Her and her uncle received the same name. She received the female name, which is Seat Kasta'ab. Seat Kasta'ab. And there's a place near our home at Swinomish that's called Hope Island Inn, but the traditional name is Kasta'ab. And so when you translate her name, it means her big hope. And it's a beautiful name, and she definitely lives up to it. But her, the bottom picture is her great grandfather, whose English name was Frank Hilaire. So he's from Lummi, and his native name or traditional name, ancestral name, was Haytaluk. And so, in regards to education or in healthcare or whatever discipline you work within, these two people are connected, and it's really not very far apart. And you could see the differences of obviously more traditional clothing from back he was born in the 1800s, but this is in the early 1900s. And to now, so it's, not within a few generations that so much has happened and so many changes have happened. But we still claim our ties to this. And that's what most, folks who are fortunate enough to be able to claim those ties and not be, dislocated. I have many friends that are adopted out or were stolen or, just removed from their families, who, I've helped them try to find their families because their families were always looking for them. And that's one of the things that's really important to know, is that our tribal communities are small, and we usually know somebody from each community, and when somebody's missing, we're usually looking for them. So, this, I like to share this photo because, they both grew up in different eras and had different knowledge systems, and we're trying, our best to tie her to him, basically to try to rekindle and reestablish and have her understand, the knowledge and the understandings of our traditional values. And that's what I consider a healthy relationship. How well are we engaged? And I'm not saying that you have to take on the philosophy of Indigenous people, but if you're genuinely, trying to form a partnership, or how often do you invite, people to the table or to have this discussion? And it's a real big challenge, because a lot of times, you have great ideas and you start planning them, and then you're basically planning around the people that, you hope to be impacting, rather than inviting them in or calling them forward. So the second photo I wanted to share, I'm not sure how much time I have. Is there a timekeeper that will hold up a thing?
Monty, you may want to be the timekeeper.
Okay, I'll try not to. It's already, actually I have a staff meeting in 10 minutes, so yeah. I'm just going to leave that.
We're a little over time, but this is beautiful, Michael. So yeah,
okay, appreciate it. I'll share this last photo and get out of your hair.
No.
This is a beautiful photo that was taken during the traditional tribal journeys that we've had, and what we understand this to be is a resurgence of our canoe way of life. And so this is something that disappeared for a little while and then it's now coming back. And this is not only influencing our tribal communities, but it's influencing science and the understanding of indigenous knowledge, or, it's really brought up forward this idea of acknowledging indigenous ways of knowing in a science, of all places, a science field. So, which has probably been one of the toughest places to have indigenous knowledge be acknowledged. So, so it's a hope for all of us, right? And this is a canoe that we paddled on called Cedar Rose from Lummi. And on this canoe is myself, who's right here, my wife, my daughter Michaela, and my son Melchor, and then the rest of our canoe. And this is a protocol where we're asking permission to come ashore, and we're acknowledging that the Quinault people are our hosts, and we're respecting their water and their land, and we're tired, and we're humble, and we need help. That is an important thing for organizations to understand, that this is a practice that we do when we go into communities and visit and want something, or we should be offering ourselves. We should be giving. We want to share our songs, our stories. We want to exchange, and so there's a protocol for landing. You can't just paddle straight in. They want to know whether you are a friend or an enemy. The paddles up mean that you come in peace, that you're not there for war. The water, the tides work in a certain way. That's why you have to paddle in. And so all this stuff is a resurgence of the understanding of our canoe way of life and the water and our relationships with the land. And our Native people don't separate ourselves from the land. And that's, been a big challenge with things like looking at the national parks. When you look at national parks, in order to create national parks, Native people were removed, right? And so that's one of the reasons why you do a land acknowledgement, is because you're talking about the removal of Native people who were once there. So I don't know. I'm saying a lot, and I wish I could, hear your questions, or I'd love to talk more about this. But hopefully this something was meaningful, and I appreciate the time today to, just the fact that I was invited in to be with each of you is really important. I appreciate, whoever organized this, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and let me know if I can help in the future. Definitely want to collaborate.
Awesome. God, that was so beautiful, Michael. Thank you.
And I guess I'll be on my way.
Michael, hopefully you're seeing some of the chats on the side of just expressions of appreciation for your words and what you're doing. And Nicole, you may want to add a little bit. I just wanted to thank you for your welcome as we're moving into the agenda, literally and figuratively, as you're inviting folks into the room. And I think you're doing that on the fly. And I also just, the story that is of your family, and you're really connecting us to a larger story. And I think the whole question of what's the health of our relationships is really central to what we're going to be talking about today. And it's a really important thread from yesterday. So just thank you so much for kicking us off in the spirit of humility and generosity. And Nicole, I don't know if there's any other piece around land acknowledgement that you wanted to add to.
No, I was just going to thank Michael for, I had written down his words of what is the health of our relationship. I just think that's so timely, and it really speaks to the bridging and belonging work that we have in front of us. So I just really appreciate that. And I always love a photo of Avi.
I know.
ACH, just love seeing her on Zoom. She's like our new little celebrity. So thank you for sharing her with the rest of the group. And I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. And, I encourage you, to sit with elders and, just listen, not have anything on the agenda, and just take some time to, take in their knowledge. And that's kind of one of our valued practices. So take care, everyone. We'll see you all.
Thank you.
You too.
Thanks so much. This is Marilyn.
Hey, Marilyn.
Hey, Marilyn.
Haishka for all the wonderful words. Haishka.
Oh man, what a pleasure. I'm so glad you're on here. We'll talk more later. Good to see you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, that was amazing way to start. And those photos are extraordinary. And welcome, Marilyn. We missed you yesterday.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it yesterday, but I'm able to join today. Thank you.
Thank you for making it. And thanks for everybody again to making the time. This is Monty Rulli. I'm one of the facilitators. A lot of you know David and Stacy too in the CI team. And, it's really a privilege for us to kind of be along this journey with you. And really our goal is, in a facilitative role, is to help really maximize your time and surface the talent and wisdom that's part of this North Sound community. Yesterday was an amazing, at least we were very inspired by just listening in and being part of the conversations. And I encourage folks, if there are things that you were particularly inspired by yesterday or that really stuck with you yesterday, feel free to chat those in. And maybe just a quick shout out to, Cedric and Rick and Linda for really starting us off with conversations about kind of really looking at the fear and the anxiety that's very real for us, but also how we start to translate that fear and anxiety into kind of mustering the resilience and courage that you all are showing through your organization. Rick talked about failing forward. All three of those organizations are doing extraordinary work to serve the most vulnerable and their clients in the community in really breathtaking ways. And for really setting the stage for vulnerability, I think yesterday we had the strength of this network is our ability to be vulnerable with one another. So would love for us to continue in that spirit in the chat, and we're going to have some chances to break out. And the one other thing that, you know, I just heard a lot of yesterday all the way through the conversation is gratitude for being part of this network, this ACH network, and what it stands for an organization that is actually living into its values, that is really living into a way of an inclusive, multi-sector, multiracial,
Good, how you doing, Brendan? Hey, are we going to do any, I forgot, I think.
Hello. Maybe that's a prompt for what are we going to do next? I just wanted to say thank you for that, the kind of spirit in which we kind of lifted up the context. I think we're going to continue the conversation today, which is to really start to move into this promise that you all have established with the North Sound, with rooting this work in relationships, as Michael so beautifully shared. And what will it take to advance equitable well-being? So in just a moment, I'm going to pivot to a couple of my partners that are familiar with the North Sound region, but kind of come at this from a little bit of a national perspective to offer up some ideas that Liz and Nicole have often offered up. How do we learn together locally and nationally, and the work with John Powell and others? So the Springboard is going to be one place that we'll do that. And we're going to have a chance to kind of dive a little bit more deeply in some breakouts soon after to say, what does that imply for how we really want to be moving forward and advancing equitable well-being? So that's kind of the game plan today. And I think Liz and team are going to help us really land the final part of the day around what do some next steps moving forward look like. And thanks for keeping the chat going. So this first question around equitable well-being, there's a national springboard, and I'm just going to kind of jump through these first couple of slides and hand it to my colleagues, Bobby Milstein and Shoma Shah, who's joined us. So some of you may have heard that some of the federal partners had asked some of the non-governmental organizations and CBOs around what does it look like from their perspective to really advance equitable recovery and resilience, and how do we really in the process strengthen the network of non-governmental organizations and local communities in doing that work. So what we've done over the last 3 months, and when I say we, it's the collective voice of kind of crowdsourcing leaders in the country around housing security and food insecurity and what do equitable economies look like, and really brought that wisdom as much as we could in 8 weeks to really discern what are some ways that we could, as a country and as communities, be moving forward. And one of those very important voices were leaders here in the North Sound, ACH, that have already been thinking about this equity journey. So as you all will have a chance to look at this springboard, you'll probably recognize Liz Baxter. And you can see Liz's quote, I have an inherent belief that the more we take care of people in our community, the better our economy and our society will be. You can hear Liz saying that. I can. In fact, you can hear it if you go to the site, and you'll hear it in her voice. And I know that the Hilliers were already referenced a couple times today. Frank and of course, Daryl Hillier and the Children of the Setting Sun was another really important perspective that anchored some of the springboard. And Daryl says, when we remember that we need to gather ourselves in the spirit of the moment and in the spirit of our ancestors, the spirit of all living things, and in the spirit of Mother Earth, then I think we will have a real foundation for change. So you can hear more of Daryl's interview, but the work of the North Sound has influenced and have inspired a lot of work that's happening nationally. And so I just want to anchor that thought as I pass it over to my colleague, Bobby Milstein, who's one of the folks that pulled a lot of this springboard together. So we're going to share some of that, and on the other side of it, give you a chance to kind of weigh in around what this might imply for the North Sound. So Bobby Milstein.
Well, it's an incredible privilege to be with all of you today. And as Monty said, the document that we're calling a springboard is really much more of a verb. It's about how do we redirect and accelerate the motion that all of us need to be able to get to a place where our relationships are healing, and all of us have the potential to grow into our full potential in just the way that Michael started off this conversation, thinking about how every generation, you know, brings that to each other and creates a world that, you know, that is going to get remade, and still adapt to changing circumstances. And everyone knows that we've had to adapt to phenomenally difficult circumstances in you know, under very trying times. And what we were trying to do with this Springboard project was first and foremost to listen to voices from across the nation about what they saw in this moment. And the table of contents is really divided into the various kinds of themes and content that we heard over and over again in a chorus of voices who were speaking to different levels of the experience and the path forward. Some of it was very much about understanding the moment, seeing this as not just, you know, sort of an isolated event, but the latest in a series of crises that that test our resilience and our humanity, and really, you know, sort of question to what extent are we capable of converting our immense loss into the long overdue renewal that we seek. And so a piece of it is about the legacy moment, and I'll say a few words about what we heard in that. Another sort of class of content were specific ideas about what it would take to change course, right? To redirect the trends that are now endangering our health and well-being, our connections and our sense of justice, into really decisive action in the moment that could steer our futures and community well-being into a different direction. And those are situational specific, they're topic specific. It depends on which aspect of our lives one's thinking about. And so those are divided into 15 chapters and occur at a couple different levels of detail. So I'll give a quick summary of what kind of content the Springboard put together around changing course. Even those decisive actions in the moment, the ability to sort of make pivotal moves that change our direction, didn't tell the full story of what we were hearing over and over again from colleagues across the nation, was that what we really need to be doing is making sort of long-term, deep-seated change in our institutions and in our cultures, and that point toward renewal of our civic life, our economic life, our social, emotional, and spiritual lives together. And so there are 3 chapters around paths to renewal, and then a final section about remembering that whatever we do in this moment, whatever we write in a document, is really just a piece of a much longer movement that's preceded us by hundreds of years and will continue long into the future. And so reconnecting us all into the work that we do as a movement. So that's just kind of a little preview of what's inside the document. A little sense of the kind of themes you'll hear. The opening sort of preface for this Springboard, locating us in the experiences of 2020, don't begin with a crisis narrative. It doesn't begin with the idea that, you know, each of us face specific crisis and we have to organize in our standard, you know, sort of identify the problem, look at the cause, solve that cause at its root. This is much more about remembering first and foremost the we and the why it's in all of our interests to change the system on which all of our well-being depends. And when that system breaks down, when it's stressed, when it demands of us greater resilience, the first appeal is not to what and how many, it should be, again, to the we and the why. And so we begin with, you know, sort of the founding promises of American ideals about establishing justice and general welfare, and, you know, the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Founding commitments that have no exceptions to them. There are no exceptions in that preamble, except daily living life, daily experiences in America from the moment of the nation's formation have always had deep-seated, ever-present exclusions to them, and have undermined our capability for achieving the full promise of our potential. And so we ground this work in the task of actually establishing a vision where all people and places are thriving with no exceptions, exactly as written in the unfulfilled promise of American idealism. It's also a narrative woven into the other competing narratives that cause us to look at broken people and not broken systems very often, that try to sort of credential solutions that really are systemic and equitable, designed to make a case that builds the will for people who might not actually feel like that their futures are at stake, but really are if all of us are not thriving, if all people in places are not experiencing the vital conditions they need to thrive. And so that's kind of what's underneath the case making that runs at the top and throughout the document. There are also a handful of guiding principles that we lift up within the beginning of this, and they'll sound familiar to many of the things that have been guiding principles and are written into the vision of your ACH and others. It's really a reminder to focus, when having to make choices and trade-offs, we should be fully valuing long, thriving lives. If people are not thriving, if our lives are cut short, that's not just an aspiration. That's something that we can measure, something that we can hold mutual accountability around, and we should be understanding that in its fullest sense, not just physical health and material wealth, but thriving in terms of our mental, emotional, social, spiritual relationships and well-being. I've spoken about the sort of commitment around dignity and justice and all the ways that relates, not just for people of color, but tribal nations and those who experience inequity and who are enduring unjust adversity. That must be, sort of our project of undoing the hierarchy of human value, telling a new story where our differences are strengths and not reasons to destroy each other. A location of people in place and unlocking the potential of people in place, understanding the interdependence of all things within living systems, and then seeing ourselves as stewards of those systems, interdependent on each other and being able to take actions, even through our vested interests, that unlock potential for all people and places to thrive. Bringing our grace, our humility, our curiosity to that always. And then as is a theme, Michael started it, but we're going to run it throughout this entire call, is looking back, far back, and reckoning with the legacies that we've inherited, some of which are really hard-won victories and cherished lessons that we need to continue, and others that we should really understand and reckon with and replace, because they really inflict harm or indignity or inhumanity on each other. So looking at past and future legacies becomes another of the guiding principles, and you'll hear that throughout this. The essence of the storyline within the springboard is really captured in this image. We do focus on one unifying measurable goal, an expectation that all people and places can be thriving with no exceptions. Of course, we are very far from that goal at the moment, in some cases headed further away, partly because our systems are not designed with that expectation in place. And so we root the work to be done, in a short list of 7 vital conditions that all people and places need to reach their full potential. These are not mysterious, right? You don't need to read decades of nuanced science to realize that we all depend on a thriving natural world. We all have basic needs for health and safety: clean air, clean water, freedom from addiction and trauma and violence, and routine health care, and food, humane housing, meaningful work and wealth, lifelong learning, reliable transportation, and a sense of belonging and civic muscle, that all of us have a place connected together, and that we can contribute and use our power together to do things that we could never do alone. So the springboard work is really rooted in these vital conditions. These are the things that actually enable us to thrive on an individual and on a social level. There are adversities that we experience, and from time to time people are experiencing, adversity that causes them to struggle and suffer. And in those moments, there is a demand for urgent services, acute health care, addiction treatment, food assistance, unemployment assistance, housing support. There are life-saving services that can make all the difference in whether one one survives and how deep that adversity is and how hard the suffering is. But there's no amount of urgent services that can ever cause us to thrive. That has to come from the investments in these vital conditions. And so that's really what we center the springboard around, and recognizing that those vital conditions are sort of a little bit different than the ups and downs that we experience through life and the services we get in adversity. Vital conditions are things that we encounter on day one and throughout our lives, and so that they persist over generations. And so we inherit them from our predecessors, and we're going to pass them on to our descendants. And so that's really the way in which we think about the nature of intergenerational well-being and system change here, our legacies for living together. What is the health of those relationships, and can we structure a world that makes it possible for all people and places to thrive? That's the storyline of the legacies here, and very much carried forward into these three lines of renewal around civic life, economic life, and emotional and social spiritual life. So that's kind of the storyline at the top of the document. The middle section around changing course really does speak to some of the specific actions that can be taken in each of these areas of vital conditions, and through some special sort of lenses around place and faith and measurement and investment. These are all areas that are sort of filled with opportunity to be able to look honestly about the world that we're experiencing, and lift up some pivotal moves that would enable us to change direction. And so there are 15 of these chapters that are organized around vital condition and special topics, and each of them sort of summarized in a few pages for, sort of at a glance, sort of overview, and then coupled with longer 15, 20, in some cases 30-page documents for people who want to take a deep dive and understand really what are some of the frontiers in housing policy, and what would it take to really assure humane housing in a way that everybody needs. Just as an example, and you could browse through all these online on thriving.us, but if we go to the next slide, there's just a few quickie examples of the kind of pivotal moves that one would read in this document. Of course, we're on the precipice of a flood of addictions across the U.S., and a lot of the contributors to the Springboard saw that crisis coming long ago, and have been working for years to develop policies that have never been fully enacted, never been fully scaled around what it would take to sort of prevent that kind of disruption in people's housing, and assure support of housing and stability both for renters and for mortgage holders. We've already disrupted a lot of healthcare, but we haven't really built the payment infrastructure for virtual care and assure its excellence as high quality, clinical service. And how do we learn what is happening with this sort of delay and avoidance of care? What part of, healthcare services have been unnecessary, and what part of it is really critical? And so we could sort of end the pattern of overuse that has consumed so much money, and reinvest that money into areas that actually produce health and well-being. Locating our economic policies at the level of individual family and community wealth, intergenerational wealth that can sort of enable people to build the prosperity that is needed, and this so often has been denied through disinvestment. And so you'll find pivotal moves about entrepreneurialism and getting capital to those endeavors that really bring wealth to communities of color. And then, policies that really locate the authority and control around recovery and resilience in local organizations, not unlike ACHs. There's a proposal built by the Funders Forum on Accountable Health to create nationwide the kind of locus of coordination and direction around action and accountability in groups just like your ACH, so that federal, state, philanthropic, business partners are not just sort of wagging the dog of what they happen to be able to do with their money, but that it's centered around the vision and persistent, sort of mutual work within communities that an ACH like yours is a prototype for doing that kind of thing. And we lift that up as a possible pivotal move in this document. There are many, more than 100 more that you could browse through and see which ones feel relevant, which ones might be frontiers for your work. The chapter on paths to renewal is asks really more questions than it gives answers. It lifts up sort of lines of work that require persistent, courageous effort to renew those legacies for well-being and for justice. It asks, how can we look across our differences and create a future where all people and places are thriving? And how do we do that in a way where all people feel like they belong and where they have multiple ways of contributing, not just as voters but as volunteers, but through their interactions with government and through other institutions, and through recognizing the civic significance of the work they do every day that shapes the prospects for health and well-being. Same for our economic life. How do we assign value and think about what prosperity really means and invest resources to those parties that can really make a difference? And our questions about what our legacies are around cultivating the emotional strength, our resilience, our care for one another, that's rooted not just in sort of caring for people in crisis, but nurturing the leading causes of life, the things that actually make life worth living, our sense of connection and coherence and agency, intergenerativity, and ultimately giving hope. I know you've talked a lot about targeted universalism in this group, and that's a big part of renewing civic life is recognizing that we have common expectations and common aspirations, but through history and policy and accumulated practice, we are not all equally situated, and being committed to invest in ways that create those human expectations for all, but invest resources first and foremost with those that have been long excluded and left furthest behind. So this document speaks to many of the things that we've learned from North Sound and from groups like yours that have been, frankly, far ahead of the curve about thinking what does it mean to be interdependent stewards in a common world. So that's just a little glimpse of what you'll find in the Springboard. It's very much in this state now. It's not a document to be read as a compendium of playbook of all the things to be done. It's much more of an invitation to take the actions that can cause us to spring forward with great force and resilience. One of the groups that's been working hardest on the idea that we can actually all thrive, we can measure that, it can be a meaningful way of working in the world, is the Wellbeing in the Nation Network. And I'll turn to my colleague, Shelma Saho, who's the executive director for the WIN Network, to talk about sort of the infrastructure that's already in place to do this work going forward.
Thank you so much, Bobby and Monty, for having me here. And I especially want to thank Michael and the First Nations people for hosting this, and Liz for hosting and having me here. You know, the whole idea of WIN and the WIN network is about relationships and system change. No one of us can actually change the underlying context together. And we can't do it without an understanding of our intergenerational legacy that got us here, or the intergenerational well-being that we need to create together. And really, the WIN began with this invitation for all of us to be in relationship, from the smallest child to the person who's been holding this story and hope, and to begin to create those changes together. And that's really what WIN is about. And while members of the WIN network come together in Zoom calls like this and think about technical things like measurement and policy change and funding and all of that, at its heart, WIN is about recreating relationships. It's about the first challenge that Michael held to us, not just what is the health of our relationships, but who are you in relationship with as you seek to create change. And the second piece of how do we, if we understand and acknowledge those legacies and the history that got us here, how do we in relationship begin to change that in a way that everyone can thrive, and in a way that if we truly see ourselves in relationship, we know that we will all thrive when every one of us is thriving. And I truly believe in that in our work. It's what everything that we do is about. I had a privilege, next slide, of meeting so many of you as part of the WIN network, but especially when I got to come and visit you in North Sound. And I have to say, I was privileged to be welcomed back to come and see the sailing of the canoes, and I was so sad to not be able to be there, because I can't imagine a more incredible time and place to learn what it would be like. You know, the way that WIN is set up is around these places of these things that we all need to do differently. The way in which we tell story and shift the way we're in dialogue and the stories we tell and the way we learn about our own stories, about how we change the narrative, about, just as we heard so brilliantly, about how land was violated and what that means then from a legal framework, about policies and investments that need to be changed. If we're not in relationship, we can never know those things, and can't even guess what to work on together. And above all, it's about how we stand in solidarity together. And this springboard that brought over 100 groups together at every level of community, and is now inviting people, if you go to the next slide, to not just springboard for 8 weeks and think together, but to spring forward to think about what this could mean to each of us in relationship, is something that we're doing at the national level in the WIN network, and that I'd like to invite you to consider doing in North Sound, to think about what this could mean in your community, in your relationships, in your region. You know, for us, we're looking at how in creating the springboard, we engaged over 100 organizations. We took WIN Week and invited communities and organizations to give their own thoughts, their ideas about what this document ought to look like. And we knew that couldn't be a one-time thing that happened in a week. It needed to be a journey that we were on. In our measurement cooperative, some of what came out, if you see what's in the writing, is there are actually measures that have to do with how we're in relationship and how we have a sense of mental, physical, social, and spiritual well-being, who feels included and who feels excluded, as well as how we have a sense of connection and meaning across generations. That those became part of what was recommended as part of our national measures for how we understand and chart a path toward equitable recovery and resilience. And all across, we're inviting people to be in relationship, to think about what it looks like to take the ideas here that are beginning and to have those conversations and to think about what that could look like in their context. Next slide. One such place that took up that challenge after WIN Week used a simple measure, the one that Bobby mentioned earlier, and that was the state of Delaware, where they began to take this measure of thriving, which has this simple question of, imagine a ladder where the bottom is your worst possible life and the top is your best. Where are you now, and where would you put yourself 5 years from now? Now, 5 years isn't really generational, but it turns out the simple measure of the simple question can actually, in a very validated way, where people in relationship can speak for themselves what a good life means for them, can actually calculate out in a way that changes morbidity and mortality and cost, all those hard things that people care about sometimes in these modern day payments. It turns out that how we feel about our lives, how we are in relationship, how we are in terms of feeling secure, how we are in feeling like we belong, has profound impact on things like that. And what we realize is if we can't create measures that help us know that and apply those measures and use those measures, it's as Liz said, I believe if we care for our people, then all those other things will improve. That's really part of what this measure set is all about, is about saying, let's start by understanding whether our people feel like their lives are getting better. Let's hold ourselves accountable to that. And with this simple measure, you can count who's thriving, who's suffering, who's struggling, but also who has hope. And on the same ladder, if you go to the next slide, Delaware decided in this moment in the context of COVID, which came out right after this, which happened right after we were gathering and right during this, they began measuring, using that measure, to say, how might we understand how people are doing in our community? How might we get into relationship with them and together with them create changes? The first thing that they saw in the very beginning of the pandemic was that 38% of people were without hope. And they knew actually that that relates to who's at risk of diseases of despair like overdose and alcohol use and suicide. And they were very worried about that. They saw immediately that that Cantrell's ladder score of the people who are suffering went up from just 3% to 15%, a five-fold increase in the first 2 weeks of the pandemic. And they knew they couldn't just stand by the side. And so if you go to the next slide, they began asking people what was going on that could help with 5 simple questions. They asked them both just how they were, open-ended questions, and listened. They began reaching out to people that they knew that they were their clients with mental health and addictions, and asked them what was going on, whether they were worried about COVID, if they were having housing or legal issues, which many of they were, and also what was going on in terms of whether they felt financially secure, whether they felt lonely or felt connected, and whether they had the supports they needed. A simple question like, if you needed something, would you have a friend or a family member who could help you with that? And instead of just using that as a research study, they put that into immediate action. If you look at the orange and the gray, those are the people who are struggling and suffering. And what they saw was that almost 3/4 of people felt that they were struggling or suffering in terms of their financial security. And instead of making them ask for things that they might have a hard time asking for, they said, is there anything we could help you in terms of a job or food or housing? They asked them and made it easy for them to be in relationship, and they reliably connected them to what they needed. If they were lonely, many people they found had lost their 12 steps groups and their peer supports, and they connected them with online supports or got them a peer and began hiring peers as a way of creating jobs. They found that many had lacked housing. They took over 3 Sheratons and a Red Robin and just housed people and began delivering mental health services right where they were. And they connected people. If they didn't have a friend or support, they said, I'll be here. And they kept checking in if they were struggling or suffering in relationship. What can we do and how can we do it? The next slide shows a little bit of what happened. And I think they were looking at this and realized they began doing this at least once a week with people that they were connecting with. And they saw, of course, this huge rise in suffering as the unemployment levels climbed to record levels greater than the Great Depression in the state. But then as things stabilized, as the stimulus bills passed, as they became to be in relationship, and as people knew they weren't alone, the level of people suffering dropped, and the percent of people thriving in the whole population went up by 0.42, which that sounds really small, but it turns out that's related to hundreds of life years gained just by helping people to thrive in relationship. And the state went far beyond that. They began thinking, how can we make this our norm? And has made this part of not just their dashboards, but thinking about how they can be really thinking about the things that are creating challenges for the people who are Haitian immigrants in their chicken factories, Hispanic and Latinx immigrants, et cetera. But I just wanted to share the story. They're a region that's looking at what the springboard means, not just in terms of what they've learned and what these measures mean, but how they can spring forward in truly being a region that thinks about equitable recovery, not just recovery, but resilience and transformation. Thank you so much for having me. I guess the last slide I had was the importance of being in each other's movements. This is a moment where truly, I had the privilege of being at my first Black Lives Matter march. And, for me, these pictures, one is on the left was actually just a picture of Muslims praying surrounded by protesters that were protecting them. And this one on the right was a man that I had the privilege of meeting who was in his wheelchair marching and who said, this is how I take a stand, how will you? This is a moment where we need to speak up for each other's causes, and that being in relationship is about being in solidarity. It's not just about the personal, it's about hearing, listening to what others need, and having the courage to stand forward. I just invite all of us, and I thank you so much for allowing me to be with you today.
Great. Thanks, Shoma, and thanks, Bobby. If there's a next slide here. You know, one thing I think Shoma and Bobby and others in the WIN network have really valued is anchoring this work in place. And so one of the things that we're really intrigued and excited to learn more about is the Indigenous health indicators that you have already started to bubble up and figure out how that might inform some of the national work and vice versa. And I think that's really the spirit of this. We are in many ways part of the same movement, even though there's some distinctive places. And I really appreciate some of the comments that are coming in around, you know, the generational outlook and intergenerational wealth equals building prosperity. The question that Mary Jo offers up reminds her of, you know, how are the children? You know, that's the spirit of, that should be our measure of progress, thinking in those ways. And so next I wanted to just share, Nicole and Mike Reich have been working a little bit on some other tools that extend some of this thinking in some really practical ways. We want to just kind of do a light touch on what that might promise or hold in terms of some work in North Sound going forward. So Mike, are you there?
I think I'm gonna kick us off, Monty. So
And I am here. Go ahead,
okay,
Nicole.
and Mike's here. Great, good. We're both here. I'm really excited to share some of the work that Mike and I have been working with, some with our staff and some with partners. And if we could just go back one slide so that question stays up, that would be great. Okay, so I've been working in this region for about 15 years, most of my time with the health department in Whatcom County before coming to the ACH. And when I see this question, how can we ensure our actions are informed by these frameworks, data, and tools? I know there are people on this call that I've known for these 15 years who I think we've been asking ourselves these questions since I remember first starting. I think what's different now is there's a real sense of urgency to unite together, takes action together, especially as our communities are fighting you know, these dual pandemics of COVID and racism. So I really want to thank Bobby and Shoma for sharing this kind of national framework that, to me, I've been diving into it and kind of hungry for. It reminds me of like the early stages of the practical playbook for those of us who are looking for direction and guidelines for community health assessments and health improvements. And you're really hungry for frameworks and data and tools to make it easier. It's not an easy lift for this type of work. So I think Mike and I are going to share a little bit of the data side and the tools side that we've been looking into. So I think in about April, we started partnering with Data Contours, which is who Mike is with, to look at, specifically at that time, it was looking at regional modeling and projections about COVID. County level, we were really having a hard time finding any county level modeling of in the North Sound. And then maybe within a few weeks, started thinking about like, well, where are we headed? And so we started asking, you know, well, how do you overlap and overlay social determinants of health, and what is already happening? Shoma shared the mental health happened immediately. And so how do we start shifting our way of thinking around data, needs assessments that's actually more real time? Many of you have heard my complaints about the lag of data for a lot of our Medicaid transformation work. It's about 1.5 years late. It's too late to make any pivot or any changes. So Mike is gonna share a bit about some of the work we've been working on, and then later we'll also share, we're going to start doing open office hours about some of these tools immediately. Actually, we'll start next week. So Mike and I could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon, but I know we have to keep ourselves limited. So Mike, I'll hand it over to you to provide an overview, and then I'll share a little bit about our data strategy and initiative.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Nicole. And yeah, we'll try and keep it down below 10 minutes, I hear, is the goal. So yeah, thank you, Nicole, and everyone else. Some of you are familiar faces who we've worked with for a long time, a lot of new folks as well. So really pleased to be here, and as Nicole mentioned, continue the work that we've been doing with the North Sound over the last 4 or 5 months now. So what we thought would be helpful is maybe talking about some overall principles that we've been thinking about and building around. I think one of the main challenges we're trying to avoid with data and with measurement, and as I think Bobby and Shoma so eloquently showed, that there's a huge amount of opportunity. This is a really fascinating and exciting nexus of people with various levels of or expertise from a lot of different places and a lot of different organizations that are all coming together and aligning and collaborating their thinking in a way that is really unique and refreshing and a huge opportunity. So the bigger question is, how do we put that to use? And from a data and measurement standpoint, there are kind of three principles that we've been norming internally within the organization and sort of framing our strategy around for how the ACH can begin to act and put some of these things into action. So the first principle is very generally is understand the complexity. I mean, inherent in some of these large concepts and why they work so well, like the 7 vital conditions and thinking about thriving and suffering, is they simplify hundreds of indicators and data points underneath into something that's easy to communicate and easy to understand and easy to act on. And from a data perspective, though, I think one of the challenges is that complexity can get lost, and people don't realize how hard it is, how much work and effort and resources it takes to pull all that together for it to be accurate and meaningful and timely and frequent. And so really thinking from sort of a goal and principle standpoint of how do we sort of understand the complexity, think about more data, partners who have data where it hasn't been shared before, think about opportunities to collect new data potentially, as Shoma mentioned with the Wellbeing Instrument. It's a great way to bring in new data that we don't currently have in a lot of communities. The second would be increasing the visibility that we have the data at, and the complexity around place is such a huge unknown for so many people because the data and the tools built for that data don't match the way that people think about where they live or the level at which they need to plan action and programs and interventions. And so thinking about what we call sort of hyper-local visibility, how do we get down to the neighborhood level and tell the story and quantify the state of the community so that we have more information and more tools to tailor our action. And then the third, and this often gets lost with complexity, is fundamentally respect individual experience. And I feel like, that has been such a great consistent thread through today's conversation, that ultimately, data is just made up of people. And if we lose the stories, the individual experience, and the reflection that ultimately the work, we can always think of it, reflect it through numbers, but it's incredibly important to realize it's people. So the second principle, the next slide here, is thinking about, coordinate and collaborate. Data, we find and we think is really an important mechanism to obviously share information, but to structure collaboration. And again, the vital conditions and the springboard is a really powerful way to organize that thinking and to help people kind of understand how that quantitative can be translated into action. And so there are some tangible, specific things that, again, we could, as Nicole said, spend a whole day talking about, but how do you use data and tools and resources to better coordinate and collaborate and improve that? And I think there's been a long thread of conversation within the ACH and partners about how to do this better. And so we've got some really exciting ideas and some things Nicole mentioned that are coming out very soon that should help this. And then the next slide, finally, and this is, I think, one of the most important things, especially as we transition and think about needs assessments, some of the more traditional ways that organizations use data individually and collectively is sort of what people called a one and done report, right? Where you do it, you put it out there, you check the box, and then you move on. And what we're seeing, especially right now with COVID, with the impacts on the economy, with the impacts on social services, on the determinants of health, things are changing so rapidly that a new approach to integrating data into decision-making is required. And so we think of it as this communicate, iterate, and scale. So communicate, identify the problem, iterate every 6 months at least. And right now it's like every month. You want to be reevaluating what it is you know, what the current state is, what things are telling you. I can't, we've all had this common experience over the last 3 months of, COVID, thinking COVID was better, shifting focus to community impact, and then going back to COVID. And that's such a common story, that whiplash that people are getting. And the opportunity right now is to get ahead of that, to integrate that cycle into the planning process. And then last is expand the coalition, recognize that, again, inherent in these large focuses on thriving, on suffering, on dealing with vital conditions and social determinants, it requires a multi-pronged approach. And so expanding the coalition is the way that it has to happen. And so the process that we think about, and here's the obligatory process diagram, but the key part is the blue box off to the left. So what does the ongoing monthly assessment and resource identification need to look like? And that's where we've been doing a ton of thinking and a ton of work applying these principles that we've just gone over into some tools and resources that we're excited to make available to the community to both help with some of the immediate requirements around needs assessments, but also to begin to inform some of the bigger strategy questions. We were on a call earlier today where somebody aptly describes the coming challenges around poverty as an avalanche, and I think that's such an apt description. It's unprecedented, certainly in our professional lives, and so we need to begin to be prepared for that and think about some really different ways that we're using data. Just real quick, a couple of thoughts. The North Sound has some unique data challenges that we're trying to be cognizant of and respectful of. Tribal communities are a big one. The issue of sovereignty that Michael raised at the beginning is a huge challenge in the data world, getting both making sure that the data is managed respectfully and lawfully, but also recognizing that there tends to be this separation between requirements and resources that are especially felt in tribal communities. And demographically and for a whole bunch of other reasons, the North Sound presents some unique challenges. And so back to the idea of how do we collect information, how do we disaggregate it in a way that makes it actionable is going to be one of the sort of main threads that we want to follow through over the coming months. And then on the next slide, some thoughts about needs assessments. This is, one of the observations is most organizations doing the work and participating, here today and more generally in the community and population health work are going to have to do needs assessments in some form or another. And so one of the immediate opportunities is thinking about how we can support and how we can do needs assessments differently. As I think Bobby and Shoma mentioned earlier, some of the conceptual frameworks that are emerging, the WIN network, the 7 vital conditions, are really powerful ways to structure needs assessments and to make them much more relevant and actionable, both for organizations, but also for community partners and for the public. And so there's a real opportunity right now to influence the needs assessments that are going to be happening over the fall, and thinking about them differently, both as ongoing processes, but also bringing some of these additional analysis tools and frameworks to bear to support the work, and a real opportunity for the ACH to bring that in a way that is more scalable and tangible for organizations who might not otherwise have the resources or funding to do it themselves. So I will turn it back over to you, Nicole, for the last couple of slides here.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So this is just a real high level overview of what both our data team has been working on with Mike, and then also, and I'll share just in a bit, a new work that we're doing called a data initiative. But this really looking at these kind of 3 areas of training and technical assistance, you looking for use cases, best practice, communication strategy is a really key area that we fall apart on with us data minds. Is we're really good at pushing out data reports, but what to do with that data is where we rarely have enough time. And so I've really appreciated Mike's kind of mentorship and how do you communicate out the data. So really looking forward to adding more tools to our toolbox around that. Continuing with the COVID impact modeling, and the community impact data that we will be sharing next week. And we will be sure to send out information on both of those following this retreat. And continuing to share things like the vital conditions or any other kind of analysis tools that are out there. I will say we are trying to keep it honed in and maybe keep some bumper lanes. It can get very overwhelming with the dashboards and how many dashboards are out there. So we're really trying to hone in and have more of that shared metrics. And then community collaboration. I'll share, the next slide will share a bit more about this data community for change. Continuing to have stakeholder convenings. Just this morning, we were talking about the need to bring together pretty urgently folks who are in this position of their needs assessments and knowing that real-time data is going to be absolutely vital for that process. So really want to lean into that and pull some people together. So then the next slide. So just real quickly, so we've launched, I think we're about a couple months in, maybe 2 months in. I can't, time means I had nothing right now, so it's hard to remember when did we start this, but the Data Community for Change initiative, really the aim of this was to launch it before it was ready, which, if you've worked with Liz before, that's how we do things. And so really the first step that we did was we wanted to recruit novice to expert data minds to plan it together. So that's what we've been working on. We've been having, I think we've had several calls, maybe 3 or 4 now, trying to extract out what's bubbling up for people around data and information needs. And these are kind of, so we brought the folks together in this first task and then really looking how to learn together, analyze data for equity, and really including the COVID impact. So much of that is interrelated. And looking for opportunities to improve the region's capacity to collect. I'd also add share and use actionable data in multiple sectors. And then this gets back to that communication side of things, of using data findings to inform decision-making and increase awareness. So really not just having the reports, but really what to do. What are the takeaways? What are you telling folks? What action do you want them to take? That really does need to come from some data people, as well as like the community organizing side of things. So really leaning into that a bit more than we ever have before. And it is an open invitation. All you have to do is email team@Sound ACH if you'd like to join this initiative group. We will always have an open door. Anybody is welcome to join us. And we meet every other Thursday. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Great. Thank you, Nicole and Mike, and see lots of healthy chat going on around measurement and centering measurement around equity and around a holistic approach. You've taken a lot of content in the last hour. So what we are hoping to do is actually take a very short break, give you a little bit of a brain break or a bio break, and then we're going to come back and allow you all or support you in having a breakout around some of the ideas that you've heard. And so 5 minutes from what's on your clock or whatever you can see, as Stacy had suggested last time, we can just go ahead and you can turn your camera off or your mute for a moment. And then again, we'll meet back in 5 minutes and put you into some small groups. So thanks so much for Bobby, Shoma, Nicole, and Mike for kicking us off earlier. We'll see you in 5. So thanks for jumping back in. Again, see a lot of really great questions around measurement and really balancing some of these big ideas and things in the springboard with how do we really look at ways that we can measure and make sure that those are achievable. And so we wanted to give you in smaller groups a chance to kind of explore the 3 following questions. And so as you can see, the first one is really kind of building on this idea of legacy that's been coming up, the norms, actions, decisions that we're inheriting from the past, and really asking what is a past legacy that we've inherited in the North Sound or your respective communities that is a barrier to well-being? Or what is a legacy we hope to pass to the future generations? And sometimes that could be the same coin, different sides. The other question we want to invite you into is just thinking about, are there some pivotal moves that maybe you've heard from Bobby or that you heard even yesterday, thinking about telemedicine, thinking about really how rewriting parts of the curriculum to really more accurately reflect the history of the North Sound and the rich culture. What are some pivotal moves around food systems or housing that you would like to either name that you're working on or would like the group to be considering? And the third kind of question is, what will it take? You know, we've talked some about measurement. There were some ideas that Nicole and Mike offered up around how we collaborate, how we think about joining efforts. And so those are 3 big questions, and we're going to let your group kind of take any of those where you'd like for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to come back to the larger group. So in just a moment, magically, Tiffany's going to put us into groups of about 5 to 7. I think the next slide says this here, Elizabeth. And it says 25 minutes, but we're going to make up a little bit of time. So it's going to be closer to between 15 and 20 minutes. And there's a Google document that you're going to see on the right. And we're going to encourage you to just plot some of your ideas in those 3 big questions as you're moving forward. And we'll have a chance to kind of think through that a little bit together when we come back to the larger group. So I'll let you all go to it, and we'll see you back together on the other side. So curious, you know, we could take this in a lot of different directions, but just that was an appetizer. I know there wasn't a ton of time there, but curious about what was most significant that came out of your conversations, and maybe even just starting with kind of the ideas around some of the legacy questions around leaving behind and putting in place moving forward, and just invite some voices from this team to kind of speak up into that.
Michaela, I'm hoping you'll repeat what you said at the end of our session.
I can do that. It was just a clarifying bit of information. Previously, when I was listening to the speakers, I had put in the chat that intergenerational wealth equals building prosperity. But as I listened and learned a little bit more, I want to rephrase that and say that intergenerational wellness is more equal to building prosperity. And so we had a bit of a conversation about that.
Can you share a little bit more, Michaela, around how that conversation evolved?
Let's see. Well, we had partners talking about us as a collective, and we have differing views as a collective, but wishing and hoping and wanting to push this work forward. And I think that takes form in wellness, specific to each community and what they identify as wellness for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So we're holding some common values around that, but giving space for folks to kind of define those in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way. I think it was your father who kicked us off. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, what a treat. And you're the next generation. Speaking of intergenerational wealth.
The daughter is, yeah.
So what else where was some energy and insight coming out just of your small group conversations?
So this is Elise. I kind of took some notes. I hope I can read my own handwriting, truthfully. With regard to the legacy, we talked about kind of the norms and roles of government and structure and nonprofits, and how we get stuck in those different roles. We talked about the conditions that create equity, that need structure and roles, but rather than being mutually exclusive or exclusionary, we really need to come together and be more complementary. An example for one of our participants, from Orcas Island, mentioned that, you know, there are a lot of different not-for-profits, but they've figured out, maybe because of, you know, kind of how geographically isolated they are, to really come together and work kind of as, even though they have different, you know, structural purposes, right? The structure is the same, but different kind of purposes for what they're trying to accomplish. They all come together and, you know, work together and make sure that they're harnessing those precious dollars that all non-for-profit, you know, that are so limited, and all non-for-profits are kind of vying for, that they benefit from, you know, from that collective idea and receipt of those precious funds. We also talked about the notion that people are created equal, and the notion that we have equal opportunity. And I particularly like this point, that each does not equal equal. You know, and, you know, I had mentioned that, you know, I had seen, read earlier this morning, kind of this identification of why COVID has hit the United States so hard and for so long. And that's the notion that we started with kind of we the people, kind of as a collective, but really what we're seeing in practice is more of that individualistic sense of self and me, and, you know, not participating or thinking about kind of what I'm doing that will impact others or the common good. Anyone chime in and let me know if I'm not speaking well.
Yeah.
Let's see. I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for kicking us off. And I saw a couple of those comments around how individualism has really become a barrier, and really leaning into kind of our communal we in some of this work. I think your other point around how do we maintain some of those relationships and roles and clarity, but not let those lock us into kind of preventing us from having these more organic relationships and spaces for learning together. It sounds like there's some nice patterns being set there. What else? How about some other groups? Where did you have some energy? Where was some heat in your conversations?
So there was a ton of really compelling personal experience and personal knowledge shared by the other people in my group that I was just sort of blown away by at various points. But I think we really hit the first part hard, you know, in outlining the sort of legacy of failure in particular our medical system in bringing equitable care to all kinds of different people. And the part we didn't really get onto is, you know, the change part, or how maybe a new legacy can be developed. So I'd be really interested to hear more about that piece as well, or to hear, like I said, everybody in my group, I think really, you know, with the exception of myself, had really good contributions. So I think if any of them want to jump in too and explain more about what they were talking about in the group, I think everybody would benefit from that. But
thanks, Jamie. Yeah.
So I was in your group, Jamie, and my background is emergency medicine. And from my perspective, I was talking about the past legacy and how I would like to see a new generation and a new legacy take place in the medical system, in that not everyone fits into the same box. And you know, not every abdominal pain is the correct abdominal pain type thing. What I'm seeing now, that I'm outpatient instead of inpatient in the hospital, is that a lot of the patients, the most vulnerable, are being sent out with, you know, a piece of paper for resources, which is really difficult when they don't have any cell phone or any way to reach out to the resources or know how to reach out. So my hope for the legacy of the future generation to assist with healthcare and the medical model overall is by having programs and panels like this, where we have some major key community players at our table to discuss what can we do, what can you learn from this panel today to take back and provide education to your hospital staff and your hospital providers. You know, I know that we've got Swedish representative, we have Providence, we have Skagit. So this is a great platform to be able to discuss what do we want to see for a legacy for our future. You know, we can all pick out some certain things that we'd love to see changed in our healthcare plan so that we do have equal or access to everyone. But I think that it starts here. It starts here with the leadership that we have on these panels to be able to start discussion, to be able to take back and have it start trickling down within the community.
Thank you for that. I had a conversation the day before last. I forget, is it Tom from Compass Health, the CEO of Compass Health? I forget his name, but he was just kind of talking about the importance of creating spaces, just as you're saying, for our different providers and other community partners, that's missing for us to really think about some of these transformations that are longer term. And just as a quick side note, in the Springboard, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, which some of you may have worked with, have a vision of what does truly transformational healthcare. They're just one voice, but you know, there might be some ideas around what that could look like, or the Trust for America's Health that might be worth taking a look at and seeing what places that kind of resonates with your group. Curious to hear others, and back to Jamie around, what are those big pivotal moves? If we were going to move away from the status quo, what are some of the pivotal moves that were popping up in your conversation that you'd like to take, are taking, would like to consider?
Hi, I guess I will speak a little bit for my group. And kind of a couple things. I think one things that Monica had talked about is she got funding for a new type of grant for that didn't have a bunch of metrics behind it. Like she said, they were all ready to do a bunch of metrics, and then the people who gave them the grant money said, no, you tell us how you're successful. So I think that is absolutely wonderful, and I think it is something that something we need to look at, because we really do kind of need to get away from metrics, because healthcare is really about care, not in health. I know we have to keep the lights on in that, but we have really let the care get out of healthcare. The other thing I was talking about, and you all have kind of hit on it, is, you know, the individualism. We've talked about like masks, how people get upset with masks, and this, again, it kind of gets into Michaela and your dad's talking about the generational thing. I talked about in our group, Americans, the reason we're individualistic goes all the way back to our founding fathers, because we wanted to be different when we broke away from the colonial Britain. So we changed our money, we changed the way we ate with our utensils, we changed the way we traveled, you know, on different sides of the road, our measurement system. We did all that. So we have generations of being different. That is why people get so upset, like being told, you can't tell me to wear a mask, because that goes against my individualism. So we really have to start breaking that down if we're going to move forward generationally to be all-encompassing. Because unfortunately, we have a long history of racism. It actually goes all the way back to the forefathers, and even the Constitution that we were talking about today. If you really pay attention to it, the Constitution really wasn't set up to help minorities. It was, in some ways, really help just the white man and continue slavery in all different types of forms. And I know it's a tough thing to say, and a lot of people don't want to hear it, but that's the way it is. And over years, we have misconstrued parts of the, you know, Constitution. And so I think that's, if we're going to move forward, is a big thing, is we need to stop being individualistic, really start as a group, and then moving forward as a generation, like, we are a group, we are one, and get rid of this individual and that we need to be different mentality.
Thank you for that. We'd love to hear a couple of others. And also, I'm going to ask David Gibbs on our team, as we're kind of scouring through the documents, if there's anything that's jumping out that's been written in the document that you want to lift up. David Gibbs.
David may be on mute, so I'm happy to jump in while he's adapting. Monty, and staying sort of in the health and medical care, was some conversation around telehealth as well, right? And that for, you know, psychiatric clients and other mental health patients, that help folks show up for their work. And just pulling on some of the dialogues we've had with some of the partners over the last several months, you know, what's the ongoing payment for that look like? What patients is that best suited for? I know as Rick's voice from yesterday that, peds and the family medicine was particularly challenging, but sort of a double click on the particularly meaningful for serving mental health. So what does that look like for us in this region?
Great. Thanks, Stace. Time for a couple more thoughts. What else would you like to lift up from your peers in your conversation that should be on all of our radar screen here?
Well, I'd love to add one because I think it was both an observation and a challenge to us all. And, from Michael's comments through the opening presentation, the importance of relationship and how we are going to have to learn how to build relationship differently and build different skill sets to be physically distant and still building strong relationships. And, just trying to figure out ways that we can help with that.
Mm-hmm. How do we build relationships in a time of social distancing that doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon? Yeah.
This is Leandria, and I just want to say a big thing for me that I brought up in my group is not just after COVID, but during COVID, how do we help our seniors who are already so isolated maintain connection with everyone, not just healthcare, but also social connection. And it's difficult when a lot of them don't have internet. Some don't even want internet. They don't want computers. And then there's, those who can't afford to have the tools to make that connection. And, we have seniors in every ethnic group out there who need to be touched and reached, and they're a very vulnerable population. And it's a challenge that I don't have all the answers to. Our homage has, been able to come up with some money to provide smartphones for some folks, but it's a little limited. And
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
And I would add to that, to Leandria, the piece that whether it's rugged individualism or looking at this interconnected piece, we are all just one pandemic away from being vulnerable. We are all vulnerable. And I shared, a baby born in Beirut today has a complete different vulnerability than one born a week ago. So that part about how do we mobilize without having a crisis? How do we free up funds? How do we move out of our silos and the burdens that we've put on one another? And even Jace was talking about the colonialism, that part of we're still informing and supporting white supremacy in the way that we report and how we do some of this. So we all keep looking at the word transformation and Medicaid transformation, but what if we look at Medicaid and say, wait, why is it just that? Why aren't we why aren't we blowing that apart? Why aren't we able to really rebuild the table, build a completely different table? Who isn't at the table who should be?
Thank you. On that note, I'm seeing a number of really good chats, and I know that I wish we had a little bit more time, but your last comment around this idea that we're one pandemic away, for all of us are vulnerable. And I think, Shedrick and Rick yesterday just talking about the different ways that they're experiencing vulnerability. And Rick is a white male who is experiencing vulnerability the first time that some of his peers and colleagues, that are minority community members and leaders are. I think that recognition, that's some of what, as we're thinking about the springboard, we have a lot of threats to our collective and individual well-being. We shouldn't be just planning for a single pandemic, but what does greater resilience and well-being look like in the long haul? And one of the things that I'm just so encouraged every time I listen to this group is a story of the container, the network that you all are building, and the credibility and the relationships you are starting to grow through the North Sound ACH is really setting you up. And I think increasingly hearing that this isn't a nice thing to do. The region actually really needs the North Sound ACH to actually play this role, to really link the long-term legacies of oppression and trauma to really creating these new legacies and figuring out what do we do in the here and now with a lot of these hairy questions. So I think there's a lot of folks that are counting on the ACH, and a lot of your partners are actually seeing this as a key vehicle. And I'm going to actually, on that note, turn it over to one of your somewhat fearless leaders, Liz, to maybe kind of talk about what some next steps could look like.
Yeah, one of the things, sorry, my head is just spinning from both yesterday and today. So I think that part of what I just heard you say, Monty, was perhaps recovering from COVID isn't the problem, but building community so that we're better prepared the next time is the thing that's in front of us. And, I think that we could beat COVID and not get any better at how our communities interact and building resilience and strength. But I think if we do the resilience and strength, we will be better at beating COVID. So you just like made my head pivot a little bit, which is not uncommon.
You always say stuff better than I did. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
And I see that Eliza is on. So, thank you, Eliza, so much for joining us. I'm, just trying to think about time, and there's a part of me that actually wants to bring Marilyn's voice into this somehow. So the slide that's up right now is the one that you all saw yesterday. And I do just want to get it to you so that you can look at it perhaps in a little bit of a deeper way and get some feedback to us. Because this is kind of, when we think of what are we trying to do here in the North Sound region, I'm going to double check myself. I'm not sure the word Medicaid is on this document. We are really talking about kind of the people, the assets, the strengths that sit here in the North Sound region. And so one of the things that I want to do, and for those of you who were with us in January, Eliza Julius joined us at that session, and at some moment when we were taking feedback, she got a microphone and she suggested that we should do some type of a youth convening. And so rather than me trying to describe it, if you could go to the next slide, and Eliza, if you could unmute yourself, would love for you to talk about kind of from there to here and what kind of how the planning has been going and what you might be asking of folks here on the call.
So I'll start with the what brought me to this idea. Oh, I'll introduce myself first. Hi everybody, my name is Eliza Julius. I work for Productions. I am a co-producer of Young and Indigenous, the podcast through Children of the Setting Sun Productions. And I had went to a ACH conference, and we had broken up into groups and we're having different discussions, and my discussion was about the youth, and it felt a little awkward for me being the only youth there, so it felt like as though I was speaking for the youth, and it kind of was like a lot of pressure because I felt like I could very well represent the youth, but then I'm not all of the youth, so I can't really speak for all of them. So that led me to think, like, why don't we have a youth conference? And yeah, so the purpose for this conference, my overall goal for this conference would be to not only inform the youth of the opportunities their communities offer, but to get their attention and get them active and involved in the community. I feel like at first I was thinking of making it and Indigenous conference, but I feel like this is an area where colored youth kind of need a reaching out instead of, I feel like they need someone to reach out to get them active. And so I've been working with a group. I don't have all of the last names. How do you pronounce this? Michaela. Okay. So I don't have last names, but I've been working with Stacy, Vanessa, Michaela, Tiffany, Nicole, and Ellie Smith, and a couple of my coworkers, and Elizabeth Harding. But we had set a date for October 22nd and 23rd, so we're thinking of making it a 2-day conference over Zoom, and ages 13 to 25. I hope to accomplish informing the youth of health programs, after-school activities, educational help, cultural awareness, drug and alcohol prevention, bullying and suicide prevention, healthy relationship skills, and tips of physical and emotional health. I would like to have a representative from relevant partner organizations to speak to the youth about programs, activities, and answer questions they might have. So that would be kind of like representatives from just kind of like people who would normally show up at ACH conferences, kind of like Planned Parenthood, Peace Health, YMCA, Northwest Youth Services, a bunch of these programs for the youth. And I feel like there are a lot of opportunities that the youth don't know that these programs have. Like, I didn't know that if you had free and reduced lunch that you had a free membership at the YMCA. Like, I would have totally taken advantage of that if I had known. I hope for the youth to leave this conference full of knowledge to help them through their everyday lives and become more active in their community opportunities. And ideas for the conference, of course, like any like speakers or representatives speaking at the conference, I feel like should have like a slideshow or at least do a little introduction of themselves so that the youth know or feel comfortable with the person speaking, or at least feel like they know a little bit about them. Icebreakers to get everybody comfortable with each other. I was thinking there are some ideas on here that wouldn't apply to a Zoom conference. And I was thinking of having like performances, like the Black Hawk Singers, if I could get them. And I was thinking, before this agenda was planned, I was thinking it would be an in-person conference, but then the pandemic hit, so now it's over Zoom. But instead of like food, I was thinking like we could do like raffles and stuff for the audience and the students attending, and instead of having like food like you would at a normal gathering, like have like e-digital like gift cards, like $20 to Uber Eats, or like $10 at Starbucks or something like that, you know, just something to make the audience feel as though we're still having a conference and still together. Yeah, so we're kind of still in the process of reaching out to organizations and getting everything put together. But the date has actually really helped get the scheduling in like more realistic terms, and the wheels are finally turning and it feels good. I'm excited. Thank you all for listening.
Well, we are so incredible. I was grateful in January when this got written up on the big white piece of paper. But just, really without you stepping in, this wouldn't be happening. So this is really exciting. Is there anything, and maybe you should just kind of keep this in mind, if there's anything that you want to ask of partners as you continue to do the planning, just know that, like Michaela and Tiffany are a conduit. So if there's anything you need to know from the folks that are on this call and elsewhere, just raise the questions and we'll get it out there.
Okay.
Liza, you should take a second if you can and read all the encouraging words people are sending you.
Okay.
Yeah, in the chat column.
Yeah.
Yes, there's already been a question about, does this have to be limited to the North Sound counties or can it be statewide?
We were thinking about making it bigger, like over time, but I feel like this isn't a conference that's just going to be a 2-day conference and then we're done. I feel like we're going to have some another one in the springtime, or just kind of keep it going to keep everyone in knowledge of these programs, because programs spike through different times of the year, so right now, in the fall, organizations could be having different opportunities than they do in the summer, or just kind of reaching out and keeping the opportunities updated and keep them going and keep them active, basically.
Thank you so much. And, thanks to the CI team for stepping in and helping with this and the planning. So awesome. More to come. Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you all.
All right. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So I know that Nicole mentioned this yesterday. She kind of let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. But we have been doing a lot of things that are related to COVID. And so I just wanted to mention some of them because we're trying to embed targeted universalism in all of these strategies. We've gotten pulled into some conversations, primarily in Whatcom and Skagit counties, about how can we expand testing so that they're at locations right now, especially for field and farm workers, that are trusted and safe locations for them to have testing. We do have a lot of testing going on, but they are not all at safe and trusted spots. We have this very weird email about 3 weeks ago asking North Sound, if you could get some masks from the military, how many would you like? And Nicole gave me a number of 2.4 million. And we literally have spent, the last probably 24 hours trying to figure out exactly how much space does 2.4 million masks take and how many semi-trucks will it take. But the reason we put that number out there, and we were the only ACH that asked for this many, is that there have been a lot of traditional ways that personal protective equipment, including masks, have been getting to organizations and people in communities, but they have actually not been looking at community. So we still have a lot of people across the region who cannot find a mask, even while it's required. So we decided to just put both feet in, and we're going to become part of mass distribution. A lot of the other things, everything that we're doing around COVID just ties back to the work that we've started with you all over the last now 3-4 years. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So we have a couple of things kind of upcoming. You've heard about the planning that Eliza and team are doing around that conversation. There are a couple of others that I wanted to mention. We are having a webinar. So you heard from Mike and Nicole about some of the data changes, and if you've been following the data summary on our website, it's going to be going through some changes in the coming week. And so typically we do a webinar to introduce that. And so there's going to be stuff happening around needs assessments and vital conditions, the COVID impact on communities, kind of crosswalking that COVID testing, hospitalizations, impact data with what's happening around unemployment, what's happening around housing insecurity, food insecurity, just so that we can actually begin to see where are the communities that are actually being impacted in such deep ways that when we think about recovery, that we should be starting there. Putting in a plug for our tribal learning series, which Tempest Dawson on our team has been leading. That's where this discussion about the tribal health indicators came out of the last session that we did, and Tempest has been pulling together some amazing leadership to, again, kind of continue this learning journey among our partner organizations so that we do, as Michael started our day with, kind of be learning and building a relationship along the way. Nicole mentioned the Data Community for Change initiative, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot on that. We have probably 17 or 18 of the partner organizations that are working on a variety of care coordination initiatives. And back in January, we were asked to try and pull a meeting together with the 5 Medicaid managed care plans to talk about care coordination. We were hoping to do that in March, didn't happen, but it's going to happen in the next 5 to 6 weeks. And so all 5 of the health plans have agreed to get on a call with all partners who are working around community-based care coordination. So we're pretty excited about that. And then I think that Holly yesterday probably mentioned the fact that, we did a kind of a broad open hours convening after the killing of George Floyd. And Holly reached out and asked if we would do some calls that were specific for people of color who work within our partner organizations. We've had 2 of those calls, and it has been incredibly powerful for me just as an individual. And so I'm hoping that when you see those mentioned in our newsletter, that you please share it among your organizations, because it's an open space, really targeted for people of color who are doing all of this amazing work, taking care of others across the region. And we're trying to figure out both how to kind of build capacity and leadership, but also how do we support the people who are taking care of the people. And so that's been pretty exciting to have happen. So the next slide. I think out of a lot of this discussion, and I'm probably not going to walk through these specifically, but the one that I want to mention, I think it came up a little bit yesterday when we were thinking, like, how do we actually make change based on what's happening? We are talking about changing our partner contracts to have some really specific expectations around addressing structural racism, this work that we've been pulling together around equity, well-being, and belonging. We know that we have 60 partner contracts today. Don't know that when we make these changes, whether we'll have 60 or 40 or 70. We just know to try and leverage our ability to contract to try and get to the kind of changes that you've been hearing about yesterday and today. And those are just incredibly important for us, I think, as an ACH. The last slide, I'm actually going to probably turn back to, whether it's either Stacy or Elizabeth. You all have been giving us an amazing amount of input and feedback, including in that Google Doc. And I think they've got some ideas about how we can summarize that information and actually get it back to you and have it be something you can continue to put together and build upon. But maybe, oh God, I put these in the wrong order. Can you go to the next slide and then you can go back to this slide? I just wanted to share a drawing that about 15 years ago, a colleague of mine drew on a piece of cardboard and gave to me. And, it really is, every time we think we're thinking outside the box, somebody will point out to us, oh, but you're still working within that paradigm. And I just, you know, in some ways I am welcoming every time one of you points out to me, oh, you're still thinking inside the box. Because I think the challenge for us is to get out of these boxes, and there are lots of them that we live within. So just thank you, you know, and I know that Monty will probably want to share some thanks as well, but you know, this has been amazing to have you all with us for these 2 days, and just appreciate you, all you do, and your time. Monty, I'm going to give it back to you.
Oh, great. Well, I don't have anything significant. I will say Shoma had to get off earlier on as part of our extended team, and she talked about this journey. And I would just say that, you know, Community Initiatives team and the Rethink team and others feel just honored to be able to kind of work and learn alongside you in the North Sound. So as long as you will have us on this journey, we will take that. And so we're hoping that as we pivot to the fall, and we'll have more opportunities to kind of work and learn with you, whether it's through a Springboard or data and measurement. We really prize this relationship and are grateful to you all for letting us in on what's a pretty special community and a very special network that's growing here. So thank you.